She didn't know her in-laws were plotting to erase her from her husband's life, until the day they kicked her out of her own home. This is a story about trust shattered, a life destroyed, and a revenge so calculated it brought the most powerful family in the city to their knees. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I hope you're having an amazing day, wherever you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button because stories like this one, stories about justice, redemption, and the sweet taste of karma, this is what we do here. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Now let's dive in. The rain had started early that October morning, tapping against the bay windows of the brownstone like impatient fingers. Claire Corleone stood in the kitchen of the home she'd lived in for 8 years, the home she'd painted and furnished and filled with memories, and watched the water streak down the glass. She was making coffee, the French press her husband James had bought her on their honeymoon in Paris, when she heard the key turn in the front door. She wasn't expecting anyone. The footsteps were heavy, deliberate, and plural. Claire set down the press, her hand trembling slightly, and walked toward the foyer. 3 people stood there: her mother-in-law, Dorothy Draper, dressed in a steel-gray suit that looked like armor; her father-in-law, Richard Draper, whose cold eyes swept over Claire like she was furniture; and their family attorney, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses whose name Claire couldn't remember. Dorothy? Richard? What's going on? Claire's voice caught in her throat. Dorothy didn't smile. She never smiled at Claire, not really. Pack your things, dear. You need to leave. The words hung in the air like smoke. Claire blinked, convinced she'd misheard. What? This house, Richard said, his voice clipped and businesslike, is not yours. It never was. James purchased it under a trust established by our family. You have no legal claim to it. Claire's legs felt weak. James had died 6 months ago, a sudden heart attack at 42 that had shattered her world. They'd been planning to start a family. They'd been happy. And now his parents, who'd barely spoken to her at the funeral, were standing in her home telling her to leave. That's not possible, Claire said, her voice stronger now, edged with anger. James and I bought this house together. Our names are on the deed. The attorney stepped forward, opening a leather briefcase and extracting a sheaf of papers. Mrs. Corleone, I'm afraid you're mistaken. The property was purchased through the Draper Family Trust, with James Draper as the beneficiary during his lifetime. Upon his death, ownership reverted to the trust, specifically to Mr. and Mrs. Draper. Claire's hands were shaking now. She reached for the papers, scanning the dense legal language. The words blurred. Trust. Beneficiary. Reversion. And there, at the bottom, was James's signature. A signature she'd never seen on this document. This is insane, Claire whispered. James would never. James didn't tell you many things, Dorothy interrupted, her voice sharp as glass. He was always too soft-hearted. Too naive. Especially when it came to you. The venom in those last words made Claire step back. She'd known Dorothy didn't like her, had known it from the first family dinner where Dorothy had asked pointed questions about Claire's family background, her education, her prospects. Claire came from a working-class family in Ohio. The Drapers were old money, Connecticut elite, the kind of people who summered in the Hamptons and wintered in Aspen. To them, Claire was an outsider, an interloper who'd somehow seduced their golden boy. You have 24 hours, Richard said. After that, we'll have the locks changed and your belongings removed. My belongings? Claire's voice rose. Everything in this house is mine. Our furniture, our photographs, James's things. James's things belong to his estate. The attorney interjected smoothly. Which is currently in probate. You'll be notified of the proceedings. Claire wanted to scream, to throw them out, to call the police. But something in their calm, coordinated efficiency told her they'd planned this. Every word, every document, every move had been choreographed. They'd been waiting for the right moment to strike. And they'd chosen the morning she was most vulnerable, still in her pajamas, still grieving, still trying to figure out how to live in a world without James. I'm calling a lawyer, Claire said, her jaw set. Dorothy's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. You do that, dear. Though I suspect you'll find your bank accounts somewhat inaccessible at the moment. Claire's blood ran cold. What did you do? James's accounts have been frozen pending the probate process, the attorney explained. That includes the joint account you shared with him. Standard procedure. It wasn't standard procedure. Claire knew enough to know that. Joint accounts didn't freeze automatically. Someone had petitioned for this. Someone had moved very quickly to cut off her access to money, to resources, to anything that might help her fight back. You planned this, Claire said, her voice hollow. You've been planning this. Dorothy stepped closer, and for the first time, Claire saw the raw hatred in her eyes. My son made a mistake marrying you. You were never good enough for him. Never worthy of the Draper name. And I'll be damned if I let some opportunistic nobody walk away with my family's legacy. The words hit Claire like physical blows. She'd spent 8 years trying to win this woman's approval, attending every tedious charity luncheon, every family gathering where she was ignored or dismissed. She'd bitten her tongue through countless passive-aggressive comments about her clothes, her cooking, her inability to produce grandchildren quickly enough. She'd endured it all because she loved James, and James loved his parents despite their flaws. But James was gone. And without him, she was nothing to them. Less than nothing. Get out of my house, Claire said quietly. Your house? Richard laughed, a harsh sound. You really don't understand, do you? You have nothing. No home, no money, no legal standing. James's will is being contested on the grounds that he was unduly influenced. We have evidence that you manipulated him, isolated him from his family. That's a lie. Is it? Dorothy tilted her head. We have emails, text messages, testimony from friends and colleagues. All painting a very clear picture of a woman who saw a wealthy, vulnerable man and decided to sink her claws in. Claire's vision tunneled. This couldn't be happening. James had loved her. Their marriage had been real, solid, built on years of friendship before it became romance. They'd met in college, 2 scholarship kids studying late in the library, bonding over their shared sense of not quite belonging in the elite institution they'd worked so hard to attend. He pursued her, not the other way around. He proposed on a rooftop in Brooklyn, no ring, just his heart in his hands and tears in his eyes. How could they twist that into something ugly? 24 hours, Richard repeated. He turned toward the door, Dorothy and the attorney following. Before she left, Dorothy glanced back. One more thing. The funeral expenses? We paid for those. Consider this your eviction notice and your bill. We expect reimbursement. $58,000. Due in 30 days. Then they were gone, and Claire was alone in the house that was no longer hers, listening to the rain and wondering if this was what drowning felt like. She didn't sleep that night. She couldn't. She sat on the floor of the bedroom she'd shared with James, surrounded by boxes she'd frantically packed, and tried to understand how her life had collapsed so completely. The joint bank account was indeed frozen. She checked online, her fingers trembling as she logged in to find a balance of 0 and a notice about estate proceedings. Her personal savings, a modest amount she'd kept separate, would last maybe 3 months if she was careful. She had her job, thank God, her position as a graphic designer at a small agency, but it didn't pay enough to rent an apartment in the city, not alone. She tried calling James's best friend, Nathan McLean, but the call went to voicemail. Same with James's sister, Lily, who'd always been kind to Claire at family gatherings. Radio silence. Claire pulled out her phone and searched for lawyers, but every consultation fee was money she didn't have. And the ones who offered free consultations? Their earliest availability was weeks away. The Drapers had moved with military precision, cutting off every escape route before she even knew she was trapped. Around 3 a.m, Claire found an old shoebox in the back of the closet. Inside were letters James had written her during their engagement, when he'd been traveling for work. She opened one at random, her tears blurring the words. Claire, I know my parents are difficult. I know they don't always show it, but they'll come around. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, and eventually, they'll see that too. I promise I'll always protect you. Always. The promise felt like ash in her mouth. By dawn, Claire had made a decision. She would leave quietly, find a cheap room somewhere, and regroup. She would fight the Drapers, but not now, not when she was this broken. She needed time to heal, to think, to plan. She took only what she could fit in her car, clothes, a few photographs, James's favorite sweater that still smelled like him. Everything else, the furniture they'd chosen together, the art they'd collected, the life they'd built, she left behind. As she pulled away from the brownstone for the last time, she saw Dorothy standing in the window, watching her go. Claire didn't wave. The motel room in Queens smelled like bleach and desperation. $79 a night, paid week by week, no questions asked. The bedspread was pilled and stained, the carpet a mysterious brown, but it had 4 walls and a lock, and that was all Claire could afford. She'd been there 5 days when her boss called. "Claire, we need to talk." Veronica Kyle's voice was tight, uncomfortable. "Can you come in early tomorrow?" Claire knew what that tone meant. She'd heard it before, when the agency had let go of 3 designers during a budget cut. "Veronica, please don't." 9 o'clock. "My office." The line went dead. Claire sat on the edge of the sagging mattress and stared at her reflection in the dark screen of her phone. She looked like a ghost, hollow-eyed, thin, wearing the same jeans and sweater she'd worn for 3 days straight because the motel didn't have laundry facilities and the nearest laundromat was a 20-minute walk. The next morning, she arrived at the agency at 8:45, hoping extra punctuality might somehow save her. Veronica was waiting, along with the HR director, a woman named Patricia who wouldn't meet Claire's eyes. "I'm so sorry," Veronica said, and she did sound sorry, which somehow made it worse. "We received some concerning information about you. Allegations of financial impropriety." Claire's stomach dropped. "What?" Patricia slid a folder across the desk. Inside were printed emails Claire had supposedly sent to clients, soliciting payments to a personal account for additional services. The messages used her name, her email address, even her signature style. But Claire had never written them. "These are fake," Claire said, her voice shaking. "Someone forged these. I would never." "We have to take allegations like this seriously," Patricia interrupted. "We've launched an investigation, but until it's complete, we have to put you on administrative leave." "Administrative leave?" Claire's voice rose. "I need this job. I need the income. You know me, Veronica. You know I wouldn't do this." Veronica looked away. "I thought I did. But there's also the matter of the call we received from a law firm, Hutchins and Associates. They said you're under investigation for financial exploitation of your late husband. They asked us to preserve all your work records." The Drapers. They'd poisoned her workplace. They'd created false evidence, made her look like a criminal, ensured she couldn't work while she fought them. Claire felt the room spinning. "This is a setup. The Drapers, my in-laws, they're trying to destroy me. Please, you have to believe me." But she could see it in their faces, they didn't. Or they couldn't afford to. The agency was small, respectable, couldn't risk being associated with scandal. "We'll be in touch when the investigation concludes," Patricia said, standing. "Please leave your building access card and laptop." Claire walked out of the office in a daze. On the street, the October sun was too bright, the sounds of traffic too loud. She'd lost her home, her money, and now her job. All in less than 2 weeks. She found a bench in a nearby park and sat down, her mind racing. The Drapers had to have spent a fortune on this. Lawyers, private investigators, maybe even hackers to create the fake emails. Why? Why go to such lengths to destroy her? Then she remembered something James had told her once, late at night after too much wine. "My parents have always believed the family fortune should stay in the family. Every generation, they've fought to keep outsiders from diluting the bloodline, the money. My grandfather tried to disown my father for marrying my mother. Can you believe that? And she was from Connecticut money. I can't imagine what they'd do if I married someone truly different." Claire had laughed it off at the time, called it old money paranoia. But James had been serious. "Promise me, if anything ever happens to me, you'll protect yourself. They'll come after you." She hadn't understood then. She understood now. The Drapers weren't just trying to reclaim James's assets. They were sending a message: outsiders who dared to join the family would be destroyed. It was about power, control, and a twisted sense of legacy preservation. Claire pulled out her phone and did something she hadn't done in years. She called her mother. "Baby?" Her mother's voice was warm, concerned. "Is everything okay?" And just like that, the dam broke. Claire told her everything: James's death, the eviction, the frozen accounts, the job loss. She cried so hard she couldn't breathe, doubled over on the bench while strangers walked past, carefully not looking at the woman falling apart in public. "Come home," her mother said when Claire finally ran out of words. "Come back to Ohio. We'll figure this out." But Claire couldn't. Leaving New York meant conceding defeat, letting the Drapers win. And something inside her, some spark of rage she hadn't known existed, refused to let that happen. "I need to fight them, Mom," Claire said quietly. "I need to make this right." "Then fight. But not alone. Let me help you." Claire closed her eyes. "I don't think you can. They're too powerful." "Sweetheart, powerful people have weaknesses too. They just hide them better. Your father always said the richer someone is, the more skeletons they have in their closet." The words lodged in Claire's mind. Skeletons. Secrets. Weaknesses. What if the Drapers weren't as invincible as they seemed? The public library became Claire's refuge. She went there every day after being fired, sitting at the worn computer terminals, researching everything she could find about the Draper family. The official story was impressive: 3 generations of business success, starting with Richard's grandfather, who'd made a fortune in manufacturing during World War II. The family had diversified into real estate, then finance, building an empire that spanned the eastern seaboard. They sat on boards of hospitals and museums, donated generously to political campaigns, maintained a pristine public image. But the deeper Claire dug, the more cracks she found. There was the lawsuit from 15 years ago, a former business partner of Richard's who'd accused him of fraud, claiming Richard had cooked the books to hide losses in a failed development project. The case had been settled quietly, sealed by the court, but Claire found references to it in old news archives. There was Dorothy's brother, Thomas, who died young under mysterious circumstances, officially a boating accident, but the old society pages hinted at scandal, at family rifts never fully healed. There were whispers of the Draper Foundation, the family's charitable trust, being investigated by the IRS years ago for misuse of funds. Nothing had come of it publicly, but the investigation had happened. The Drapers had secrets. They'd just been very good at burying them. Claire started making notes, building a timeline, cross-referencing names and dates. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for, but she knew it was there, some piece of information, some weak point she could exploit. Then, 3 weeks into her research, she found it. It was a small article from a real estate publication dated 10 years earlier. James had been quoted in it, discussing a property development his father's company was undertaking in Brooklyn. Nothing unusual, except for one line: "The Draper Trust will be converting the former textile factory into luxury condominiums, preserving the historic facade while creating modern living spaces." Claire cross-referenced the address with current property records. The building was still there, still owned by the Draper Trust. But according to the city's housing database, it wasn't luxury condominiums, it was residential units renting at below-market rates, classified as affordable housing. That was strange. Why would the Drapers, who only dealt in high-end properties, maintain affordable housing? She dug deeper. The building received significant tax breaks from the city, breaks intended for developments that provided affordable housing to low-income families. But the rental income listed in the trust's public tax filings suggested the units were renting for far more than the city's affordable housing guidelines allowed. Claire's pulse quickened. If the Drapers were claiming tax breaks for affordable housing while charging market-rate rents, that was fraud. Serious, prosecutable fraud. She spent the next 2 weeks verifying everything, cross-checking public records, tax filings, and rental listings. The more she looked, the clearer the pattern became. The Drapers had been running this scheme for at least 5 years, possibly longer. They'd collected millions in tax breaks while lining their pockets with rental income that should have been capped. It was exactly the kind of skeleton her father had talked about. Claire sat back in the library chair, her hands trembling. She had something. It wasn't everything. She'd need more evidence, documentation, maybe even testimony from tenants, but it was a start. For the first time since James died, she felt something other than grief and fear. She felt hope. Getting evidence was harder than Claire expected. The Drapers had built their empire on layers of shell companies, trusts, and legal structures designed to obscure ownership and liability. Every document Claire found led to 3 more she needed to see. But she was patient. She'd learned patience from James, who taught her that the best design work came from refining and revising, from staying with a problem until the solution emerged. She started small. She visited the Brooklyn building in person, posing as a prospective tenant. The superintendent, a tired-looking man in his 60s named Leo Kasabian, showed her a cramped 1-bedroom apartment with water stains on the ceiling and windows that didn't quite close. "It's $1,700 a month," Leo said, not quite meeting her eyes. First month, last month, and security deposit up front. $1,700. For a unit that should have been capped at $800 under the city's affordable housing guidelines. That seems high, Claire said carefully. Isn't this building part of the affordable housing program? Leo's expression shuddered. You'd have to talk to the management company about that. But as Claire left, Leo followed her outside. He glanced around nervously, then lowered his voice. You seem like a nice lady, so I'm going to tell you something. Don't rent here. This place is a scam. They jack up the rents, pocket the difference, and if you complain, they find a way to evict you. I've seen it happen a dozen times. Claire's heart raced. Do you have proof? Leo hesitated. I keep records. Rent rolls, maintenance requests they ignore, tenant complaints. Management doesn't know, they think I'm just a dumb super who follows orders. But I've been documenting everything for years. Why? Because my daughter applied for affordable housing. She's a single mom, works 2 jobs, can barely make rent. She was told there were no available units here. But I see vacant apartments sitting empty all the time, and I see new tenants moving in who clearly aren't low income. His jaw tightened. It's wrong. But I need this job. I can't afford to speak up. Claire pulled out her phone. What if I told you I'm building a case against the people who own this building? What if I could use your records to expose them? Leo studied her face. You're serious. Dead serious. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, meet me tomorrow night. Bring a flash drive. The files Leo gave Claire were explosive. Rent rolls showing massive discrepancies between what tenants paid and what was reported to the city. Emails from the Draper Trust Property Management Company explicitly instructing Leo to deny affordable housing applications from truly low-income tenants. Photographs of violations, broken heating systems, mold, pest infestations, that management had refused to fix. It was enough to end the Drapers. But Claire needed more than just the Brooklyn building. She needed to show a pattern. She hired a lawyer, not a big firm, but a solo practitioner named Sarah Connor who specialized in tenant rights and housing fraud. Sarah took Claire's case on contingency, believing in the evidence Claire had gathered. This is good, Sarah said, reviewing the documents in her cramped office in Lower Manhattan. Really good. But we need to connect it directly to Richard and Dorothy Draper, not just their trust. We need to show they knew about the fraud. Claire had thought about that. James used to handle some of the trust's paperwork. He hated it, said his parents micromanaged everything. If they micromanaged, they knew. Can you prove that? Claire couldn't. Not yet. But then she remembered James's home office, the one she'd left behind when she'd been evicted. James had kept years of files there, contracts, emails, meeting notes. If Claire could get back into the brownstone, even for a few minutes, she might find something connecting Richard and Dorothy to the fraud. The problem was, the Drapers had changed the locks. Claire no longer had any legal right to enter. Unless... She called Nathan McLean again. This time, he answered. Claire? Nathan sounded wary. I've been meaning to call you back, but... I need your help. Claire interrupted. I need to get into the brownstone. Just for an hour. That's breaking and entering. I'm not breaking in. I'm retrieving my late husband's personal property, which his parents stole from me. Claire kept her voice steady. Nathan, you were James's best friend. You know he'd want me to have his things. His files, his photos, his letters. Nathan was silent. Then, the Drapers told everyone you manipulated James. That you were after his money. And you believed them? I don't know what to believe. James is dead, and you're the only one fighting over his estate. Because they kicked me out of my home and stole everything. Claire's voice rose despite herself. Nathan, they've frozen my bank accounts, gotten me fired, and are trying to contest James's will. They're destroying me. And you think I'm the problem? More silence. Then, quietly. What do you need me to do? Relief flooded through Claire. Do you still have your key to the brownstone? James gave me one years ago. For emergencies. This is an emergency. They went at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday night. Nathan had confirmed the house was empty. Dorothy and Richard had already moved back to their primary residence in Connecticut, keeping the brownstone vacant while the estate sorted itself out. Claire's hands shook as Nathan unlocked the door. Being back in the house felt surreal, like visiting a museum of her former life. Everything was exactly as she'd left it, but covered in a fine layer of dust. She went straight to James's office, a small room on the second floor that overlooked the garden. His desk was still cluttered with papers and books, his reading glasses folded on top of a legal pad. 20 minutes, Nathan whispered. That's all we have. Claire opened drawers, scanning files. James had been meticulous, organized. She found folders labeled by year and category: property management, investment statements, trust documents. In the 2019 folder, she found it, an email thread between James and his father about the Brooklyn building. James had questioned the rent figures, pointing out the discrepancy with the affordable housing requirements. Richard's response was cold and dismissive: the city doesn't audit these things. As long as we maintain the appearance of compliance, we're fine. This is how business works. And there, at the bottom of the thread, was Dorothy's reply: your father is right. We've been doing this for years. Stop being so naive. Claire's hands trembled as she photographed every page with her phone. This was it. Proof that Richard and Dorothy knew about the fraud, had actively participated in it, had dismissed concerns. She kept searching, finding more emails, more documents. Financial statements showing the true rental income. Meeting notes where Richard discussed maximizing the affordable housing tax advantage. A memo from the trust accountant warning about audit risks, which Richard had annotated with, handle it. By the time Nathan told her they had to leave, Claire had photographed over 200 pages of incriminating evidence. As they locked the door behind them, Nathan turned to her. I'm sorry. For believing them. For not calling you back. Claire managed a small smile. You're helping now. That's what matters. What are you going to do with all this? I'm going to bury them. Sarah Connor filed a whistleblower complaint with the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development 3 days later. The complaint was detailed, specific, and backed by hundreds of pages of documentation. Within a week, the city launched an investigation. Within 2 weeks, the IRS got involved, examining whether the Drapers had fraudulently claimed federal tax credits. Claire waited, watching the news, monitoring court filings. The investigation was confidential at first, but word leaked. It always did when powerful people were involved. The real estate blogs picked it up first, then the mainstream press. Draper Family Trust under investigation for affordable housing fraud. IRS probes Connecticut family's tax credit claims. Former tenants accused Draper Trust of exploiting affordable housing program. Claire watched Dorothy Draper's face on the evening news, carefully composed, professionally outraged, insisting the allegations were baseless and motivated by a disgruntled family member. This is clearly an attack orchestrated by my son's widow, Dorothy told the reporter, her voice dripping with disdain. A woman who married him for money and is now trying to destroy our family's reputation when we refused to give her what she wanted. But the evidence was too strong. The city found violations at not just the Brooklyn building, but 3 other properties owned by the Draper Trust. Tenants came forward with stories of illegal rent increases, harassment, and retaliation. The IRS discovered the Drapers had claimed over $4 million in fraudulent tax credits over 5 years. The investigation expanded. Suddenly, other aspects of the Draper business empire were under scrutiny: offshore accounts, questionable deductions, suspicious transfers between family members. Richard Draper's company lost 2 major contracts when corporate partners distanced themselves from the scandal. The family's seat on the board of the Met Museum was temporarily suspended. Social invitations dried up. Claire watched it all unfold from her motel room in Queens, feeling a savage satisfaction she'd never known she was capable of. But the Drapers weren't finished. They struck back. The process server found Claire leaving the library one afternoon. She was handed papers for a defamation lawsuit. The Drapers were suing her for $10 million, claiming she'd maliciously fabricated evidence to destroy their reputation. Sarah Connor was furious when Claire showed her the filing. This is a slap suit, strategic litigation against public participation. They're trying to intimidate you into backing down. Will it work? Not if we fight it. But it's going to get ugly. It did get ugly. The Drapers' legal team filed motion after motion, demanding discovery, depositions, documentation. They subpoenaed Claire's phone records, her emails, her financial statements. They questioned everyone she knew, her mother, her former coworkers, her college friends. They were looking for anything they could use to paint her as unstable, vindictive, a liar seeking revenge. And they found something. Or rather, they created something. A witness came forward, a woman named Diane Murphy who claimed to be a former friend of Claire's from college. In a sworn affidavit, Diane stated that Claire had admitted to marrying James for his money, that she'd said the Drapers were obstacles to be eliminated, that she talked about framing them for crimes. Claire had never met anyone named Diane Murphy. She's lying, Claire told Sarah. I don't know this woman. Someone paid her to say this. Can you prove that? Claire couldn't. Not immediately. The affidavit made the news. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. Claire wasn't the victim anymore. She was the villain, the scheming widow who manufactured a fraud case to get revenge on her in-laws. Public opinion turned. Online comments were brutal. The Drapers' defamation case gained momentum. Claire felt the walls closing in again. Just when she thought she was winning, the Drapers had found a way to twist the knife. She was back in the motel room, staring at the ceiling, when her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Mrs. Corleone? The voice was male, nervous. My name is Thomas Ripley. I worked for the Draper Trust. I need to talk to you. They met in a diner in Brooklyn, far from anywhere the Drapers might have eyes. Thomas was in his early 30s, thin and anxious, constantly glancing at the door. I was the assistant property manager for the trust, he said, stirring his coffee without drinking it. I handled day-to-day operations for their residential buildings, including the affordable housing properties. Why are you talking to me? Claire asked. Because I couldn't keep quiet anymore. When I saw them attacking you, blaming you for exposing what I knew was true. He shook his head. I have documents. Internal memos, financial reports, emails where Richard and Dorothy explicitly ordered us to maximize rental income regardless of the affordable housing restrictions. They knew exactly what they were doing. Claire's pulse quickened. Why didn't you come forward before? They paid me well to keep quiet. And I was scared. The Drapers destroy people who cross them, I've seen it. But watching them tear you apart while pretending to be victims. Thomas finally met her eyes. I can't let that happen. He slid a flash drive across the table. This is everything. 5 years of records. It proves they orchestrated the fraud from the top down. And, he hesitated. It also shows they hired a PR firm to create the false witness testimony against you. Diane Murphy is an actress. They paid her $50,000 to lie. Claire felt like she'd been struck by lightning. You can prove that? It's all there. Contracts, payment records, scripts they gave her. Why would you risk this? Thomas smiled bitterly. Because I'm tired of being part of something rotten. And because my little sister is a single mom who applied for affordable housing 3 years ago. She was rejected while I watched luxury cars pull up to low-income buildings. I've been complicit in hurting people like her. Maybe this is my chance to do something right. Claire wanted to cry, to laugh, to scream with relief. Thank you? Don't thank me yet. The Drapers have a lot of power. This isn't over. No, Claire agreed, closing her hand around the flash drive. But it's about to be. Sarah Connor called an emergency press conference. Claire hadn't wanted to, hated the idea of putting her face out there, making herself a public figure. But Sarah insisted. We need to control the narrative, Sarah said. Right now, they're painting you as the bad guy. We expose them, publicly, and force the authorities to act. So Claire stood in front of a cluster of cameras in Sarah's office building, her hands clenched at her sides, and told her story. She talked about James, about their love, about his death and her grief. She talked about the eviction, the frozen accounts, the calculated destruction of her life. She talked about what she'd found, the fraud, the exploitation, the Drapers' willingness to hurt hundreds of families for profit. And then Sarah displayed the evidence, the emails, the financial records, the rental agreements. She showed proof of the fake witness, played a recording of Diane Murphy admitting she'd been paid to lie. The press went wild. The headlines the next day were savage. Draper family accused of orchestrating fraud and witness tampering. Evidence suggests Drapers hired actress to defame dead son's widow. They tried to destroy me. Widow fights back against powerful in-laws. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media erupted with support for Claire and outrage at the Drapers. Hashtags trended, hashtag Justice for Claire, hashtag Draper the Doors, hashtag Affordable Housing Scam. The city's investigation accelerated. The IRS expanded its probe. The FBI opened a criminal investigation into witness tampering and fraud. And then the dominoes really started to fall. The Drapers' business partners began severing ties. Banks that had financed their developments for decades suddenly wanted nothing to do with them. The boards they sat on quietly asked for their resignations. Their name, once synonymous with prestige and respectability, became toxic. Richard Draper's company filed for bankruptcy protection within 3 weeks of the press conference. The Draper Foundation was dissolved by court order, its remaining assets seized to compensate the families who'd been defrauded. Their Connecticut estate was put up for sale to cover legal fees and settlements. And through it all, Dorothy and Richard maintained they'd done nothing wrong, that they were victims of a conspiracy, that Claire was a malicious liar. But fewer and fewer people were listening. The call came on a Tuesday evening in March, 5 months after Claire had been evicted from her home. She was in a new apartment now, nothing fancy, a studio in Astoria she could actually afford with the settlement money she'd received from the affordable housing lawsuit. Thomas Ripley's evidence had been so damning that the Drapers had been forced to settle, paying Claire $200,000 in damages for her eviction and the freezing of her accounts. It wasn't the fortune the Drapers had, but it was enough. Enough to rebuild. Claire Corleone? The voice on the phone was unfamiliar, female, professional. Yes? My name is Jennifer Abbott. I'm calling on behalf of Dorothy and Richard Draper. They'd like to meet with you. Claire's grip tightened on the phone. Why? They have a proposal. They're hoping you might be willing to resolve the remaining legal issues between your families. Translation: they wanted to settle. To make this go away before the criminal trials began. I'll think about it, Claire said and hung up. She did think about it. For 3 days, she weighed whether facing the Drapers again would bring closure or just reopen wounds that had barely begun to heal. In the end, curiosity won. They met in a lawyer's office in Midtown, neutral territory, sterile and professional. Dorothy and Richard arrived first, and Claire barely recognized them. Dorothy had aged a decade in 5 months. Her hair, once perfectly coiffed, was streaked with gray and pulled back severely. She'd lost weight, her expensive suit hanging loose on her frame. The imperious confidence she'd worn like armor was gone, replaced by something brittle and desperate. Richard looked even worse. His face was gaunt, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. The powerful businessman who'd stood in Claire's home and ordered her out now looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. Claire sat across from them, Sarah Connor at her side, and waited. It was Dorothy who spoke first, her voice stripped of its usual venom. We wanted to discuss a settlement. I'm listening, Claire said evenly. Richard cleared his throat. The criminal charges, if you would agree to provide testimony stating that we were unaware of the full extent of the fraud, that it was executed by subordinates without our knowledge. You want me to lie? Claire interrupted. We want you to consider that perhaps the truth is more nuanced than you've presented, Dorothy said, a flash of her old hauteur returning. We made mistakes, yes. But we're not criminals. We're a family trying to. A family? Claire's voice was cold. You kicked me out of my home while I was grieving your son. You stole everything I had. You tried to ruin my reputation, my career, my life. You paid someone to lie about me in court. And now you want to talk about family? Dorothy's composure cracked. We were protecting our legacy. Surely you can understand that. James was all we had, and when he died, you decided I was the enemy, Claire finished. Because I was never really family to you, was I? I was just a poor girl who got lucky enough to marry your son. Silence filled the room. Richard and Dorothy exchanged a look, and Claire saw something pass between them, shame, perhaps, or just the recognition that their strategy wasn't working. What do you want? Richard finally asked, his voice rough. Name your price. Claire leaned back in her chair. She'd imagined this moment 100 times, the Drapers on their knees, begging, offering her anything to make the pain stop. She'd thought it would feel triumphant. Instead, she just felt tired. I want you to admit what you did, she said quietly. Publicly. I want you to acknowledge that you orchestrated the fraud, that you lied about me, that you tried to destroy me because you couldn't accept that your son loved someone you didn't approve of. Dorothy's face went white. That would guarantee prison time. Yes, Claire agreed. It would. You can't seriously expect us to. I don't expect anything from you. Claire interrupted. I learned that lesson the hard way. But here's what's going to happen. You're going to face the consequences of your choices. The city is going to prosecute you for housing fraud. The IRS is going to prosecute you for tax fraud. The FBI is going to prosecute you for witness tampering. And I'm going to testify at every single trial, telling the truth about what you did. Claire. Dorothy's voice broke. Please. We made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. But we're not bad people. We were grieving, we were scared, we made poor choices. You terrorized me, Claire said, her voice steady despite the emotion building in her chest. You took the worst moment of my life and made it unbearable. You turned my grief into a nightmare. And you did it deliberately, methodically, with no remorse. We're sorry, Richard whispered. God help us, we're sorry. And that's when Claire saw it. Real remorse, real recognition of what they'd done. Not the calculated apology of people trying to escape consequences, but actual human regret. It didn't change anything. But it was something. I believe you, Claire said. But sorry isn't enough. Sorry doesn't undo the damage. Sorry doesn't give me back the months I spent terrified and broke and wondering if I'd ever recover. Dorothy was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. What can we do? What would be enough? Claire thought about it. She thought about James, about what he would have wanted. He'd loved his parents despite their flaws, had always hoped they'd become better people. You can face justice, Claire said finally. You can plead guilty, accept your punishment, and spend whatever time you have left trying to make amends to the people you hurt. The tenants you exploited, the families you kept out of affordable housing, the city you defrauded. That's what would be enough. Richard's shoulders sagged. Dorothy covered her face with her hands. Their lawyer, a slick man in his 50s who'd been silent until now, interjected. Mrs. Corleone, my clients are willing to offer you a substantial sum. I don't want their money, Claire said, standing. I want them to do the right thing. Finally. She walked to the door, Sarah following. Before she left, she turned back. James believed people could change, she said quietly. He believed that even when someone made terrible choices, they could still choose differently going forward. I don't know if that's true. But if you want any chance of honoring his memory, now would be the time to prove it. Then she left them there, two powerful people who'd lost everything, sitting in an anonymous office with only their choices for company. The Drapers didn't take Claire's advice immediately. For 3 weeks, they continued to fight, continued to protest their innocence, continued to burn through their remaining resources on legal fees. But the evidence was overwhelming. Juries were being selected. Prosecutors were preparing their cases. And every day brought new revelations, more properties with violations, more fraudulent tax filings, more victims coming forward. Finally, on a gray April morning, Richard and Dorothy Draper stood in federal court and pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud, tax evasion, and witness tampering. The judge sentenced Richard to 5 years in federal prison. Dorothy received 3 years. The Draper Trust was dissolved entirely, its remaining assets liquidated to compensate victims and cover restitution. Claire watched the sentencing from the gallery, anonymous among the crowd of reporters and observers. She felt no joy at seeing them led away in handcuffs. Only a profound sense of finality. It was over. The brownstone went up for auction 6 weeks later. Claire attended, not to bid, she couldn't afford it, and wouldn't have wanted it even if she could, but to say goodbye. She walked through the rooms one last time, seeing ghosts everywhere. James making coffee in the kitchen. James reading in the study. James laughing in the living room, his head thrown back, utterly alive. In his office, she found something the auctioneers had missed, a letter, tucked into a book on the shelf. It was addressed to her, in James's handwriting. Her hands shook as she opened it. My darling Claire. If you're reading this, something's happened to me. I've been having chest pains. I haven't told you because I didn't want you to worry, but the doctor says I need to see a cardiologist. I'm sure it's nothing. But just in case, I need you to know that you were the best thing that ever happened to me. You made me brave enough to be myself, even when that self disappointed my parents. You taught me that love is about choice, not obligation. I know my parents will make things difficult for you if I'm gone. They always believed I should have married someone from our world. They never understood that you are my world. I've left instructions with my lawyer, not the family attorney, a different one, someone my parents don't know about. His name is Marcus Anderson, and he has a copy of my real will, the one I made without my parents' knowledge. You'll find his contact information in the safe deposit box at Chase, box 247. The key is taped under the third drawer in my desk. Asterisk, don't let them take everything from you, Claire. Fight back. You're stronger than you know. All my love, forever. James. Claire read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she went to the desk, found the key exactly where James said it would be, and called Sarah Connor. The safe deposit box contained a will dated 2 months before James's death. In it, James left everything to Claire: the house, his personal accounts, his share of the family trust. He'd anticipated his parents' response and had taken steps to protect her. The Drapers had hidden this will, destroyed it, or paid James's family lawyer to lose it. It didn't matter now, they were already in prison. But it meant that Claire's legal claim to James's estate was ironclad. With Sarah's help, Claire filed to reopen the probate case. This time, there was no opposition. The Drapers' lawyer had been disbarred for his role in the fraud, and there was no one left to fight her claim. The brownstone was hers. The frozen accounts were released. James's personal effects, which the Drapers had seized, were returned. Claire didn't keep the house. She sold it for a price that would have made James proud, then donated half the proceeds to a non-profit that helped low-income families secure affordable housing. The other half she used to start a foundation in James's name, one that provided legal assistance to people fighting exploitation by landlords and property owners. It was what James would have wanted. To turn his family's legacy of greed into something that helped people. A year after the Drapers' sentencing, Claire stood in the office of the James Corleone Justice Foundation, looking at the photos on the wall. Families they'd helped. Cases they'd won. Lives that had been changed. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. This is Dorothy. I'm being released next month, early release for good behavior. I wanted to ask if you would be willing to meet with me. I understand if the answer is no. But I've had a lot of time to think about what I did, and I need to apologize properly. Not to ask for anything. Just to acknowledge the harm I caused. D. Claire stared at the message for a long time. Part of her wanted to delete it, to never look back. The Drapers had taken so much from her, her husband, her home, her sense of security. She owed them nothing. But she thought about James again. About his belief in redemption, in second chances, in the possibility of change. And she thought about the person she wanted to be, not defined by anger and revenge, but by the choice to move forward, to grow beyond the trauma. She typed a response. I'll meet you. Once. Then we go our separate ways. See. The reply came quickly. Thank you. That's more grace than I deserve. Claire set down her phone and looked out the window at the New York skyline, the city that had been the backdrop for her greatest joy and her deepest pain. She'd lost James. That would always hurt. But she'd found herself, stronger, fiercer, more resilient than she'd known she could be. The Drapers had tried to erase her. Instead, they'd forged her into someone unbreakable. The meeting with Dorothy took place in a small cafe in Queens, far from the marble and mahogany of the Draper family's former world. Dorothy arrived early, dressed simply, her hands clasped nervously around a cup of tea. She looked different, not just older, but softer somehow. Prison had stripped away the harsh edges, leaving someone who looked almost vulnerable. Claire sat down across from her, and for a long moment neither spoke. Thank you for coming, Dorothy finally said, her voice quiet. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't, Claire admitted. Dorothy nodded. I wouldn't have blamed you. What we did to you. She paused, gathering herself. What I did to you was unforgivable. I've replayed it 1,000 times in my mind, and every time, I'm horrified by the person I was. Why did you do it? Claire asked. I never understood. Was it really just about money? No, Dorothy said slowly. It was never about money, not really. It was about fear. Fear that James had chosen a life we couldn't control. Fear that he was slipping away from us. Fear that we'd lose him. Her voice broke. And then we did lose him, and instead of accepting that grief, instead of reaching out to you, the person he loved most, we tried to destroy you. Because if we could make you the villain, we didn't have to face our own failures as parents. Claire felt tears pricking her eyes. He loved you, you know. Even when you made it hard. He always hoped you'd accept me. I know, Dorothy whispered. I found letters he wrote but never sent. Letters where he talked about how much he wanted us to be a real family, you, him, and us. He wanted his children to know their grandparents. He wanted holiday dinners and shared memories. And we threw all of that away because we couldn't let go of our pride. They sat in silence, two women bound by their love for the same man, separated by the chasm of what had been done. I don't expect forgiveness, Dorothy continued. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I see what I did. I understand the harm I caused. And I'm spending the rest of my life trying to make amends. I volunteer at a legal aid clinic now. I help people who've been exploited by landlords, people like the tenants we hurt. It's a small thing. It doesn't undo the damage. But it's what I can do. Claire studied Dorothy's face, looking for deception, for manipulation. But all she saw was genuine remorse. James believed people could change, Claire said finally. He believed in redemption. I don't deserve redemption. Maybe not, Claire agreed. But maybe that's not for me to decide. What matters is what you do with the rest of your time. Whether you choose to be different. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. I want to be. God, I want to be someone he could have been proud of. Claire reached across the table and, after a moment's hesitation, took Dorothy's hand. It was thin and cold, trembling slightly. Then be that person, Claire said gently. Not for me. Not for forgiveness. But because it's the right thing to do. Dorothy nodded, unable to speak. They finished their tea in a companionable silence, and when they parted on the street corner, Dorothy pulled Claire into a brief, awkward hug. Thank you, Dorothy whispered. For being the person James knew you were. For being better than we deserved. Claire watched her walk away, this diminished woman who'd once wielded so much power, and felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness, exactly. The wounds were too deep for that. But perhaps the beginning of understanding. The start of letting go. 2 years later, Claire stood in the garden of a house in Brooklyn, not the brownstone she'd shared with James, but a new place, one she'd chosen for herself. It was smaller, cozier, filled with light. She was hosting a fundraiser for the foundation, and the garden was crowded with people, lawyers, activists, former clients whose lives had been changed by the work they'd done together. Sarah Connor was there, laughing with Thomas Ripley, who'd become the foundation's lead investigator. Leo, the superintendent who'd first given Claire evidence against the Drapers, was telling stories to a rapt audience. Nathan McLean had flown in from Seattle, where he'd moved to start fresh. And in the corner, standing slightly apart, was Dorothy. She'd been released from prison 8 months earlier, and had kept her word. She volunteered 20 hours a week at the legal aid clinic. She'd sold her last piece of jewelry to donate to the foundation. She attended every event, always in the background, never drawing attention to herself. Claire wasn't sure they'd ever be close. The wounds were too deep, the history too painful. But there was a tentative peace between them, built on Dorothy's consistent actions and Claire's willingness to allow for the possibility of change. Richard had died in prison 6 months into his sentence, a massive stroke. Dorothy had been allowed to attend the funeral, and Claire had gone too, standing at the back of the small ceremony. Not for Richard but for James, who would have wanted someone there who'd loved him. As the sun set over the garden, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Claire felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Dorothy holding out a small box. I wanted to give you this, Dorothy said. It was James's. From when he was a boy. I should have given it to you years ago. Claire opened the box. Inside was a small compass, tarnished with age. On the back was an inscription, always find your way home. His grandfather gave it to him, Dorothy explained. He carried it everywhere until he met you. Then he said he didn't need it anymore. Because you were his home. Claire's throat tightened. She closed her fingers around the compass, feeling its weight, its history. Thank you, she said simply. Dorothy nodded and stepped back, melting into the crowd. And Claire stood there, holding this piece of James, surrounded by the community she'd built from the ashes of her destroyed life. She'd survived the worst things she could imagine. She'd been broken and rebuilt. She'd faced down powerful enemies and emerged victorious. But more than that, she'd chosen who she wanted to become. Not bitter, not consumed by revenge, but someone who fought for justice, who helped others, who believed in the possibility of change. She looked up at the darkening sky and whispered, I did it, James. I fought back. I won. And I became someone you'd be proud of. The compass was warm in her hand. And for the first time since his death, Claire felt at peace. Years later, Claire sat across from a young woman in the Foundation's conference room. The woman's name was Emma, and her story was painfully familiar: a wealthy family trying to steal her inheritance, accounts frozen, reputation destroyed. I don't know what to do, Emma whispered, her eyes red from crying. They have all the power. All the lawyers. All the money. How do I fight back? Claire reached across the table and took Emma's hand. You fight smart, she said. You gather evidence. You find allies. You don't give up, no matter how hopeless it seems. And you remember that power isn't just about money or status. It's about knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone take that from you. Emma looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. You really think I can win? Claire smiled. I know you can. Because I did. And I'm going to help you every step of the way. As Emma left, clutching the folder of resources and legal contacts Claire had assembled, Sarah appeared in the doorway. Another one saved, Sarah said with satisfaction. Another one fighting back, Claire corrected. We just give them the tools. They save themselves. Sarah leaned against the doorframe. You ever think about writing a book? Your story could inspire a lot of people. Claire considered it. Maybe someday. But for now, I'd rather live the story, helping people, building this foundation, making a difference. That's enough. More than enough, Sarah agreed. That evening, Claire returned to her house in Brooklyn. She'd remarried 2 years earlier, a kind, steady man named Daniel who taught high school history and made her laugh. He was nothing like James, and that was okay. She'd learned that loving again didn't mean forgetting, it meant choosing to keep living. Daniel was cooking dinner when she arrived, and the house smelled like garlic and basil. Their dog, a rescue mutt named Justice, bounded over to greet her. How was your day? Daniel asked, kissing her forehead. Good, Claire said. We took on a new client. Her story reminded me of mine. You going to help her? Already started. Daniel smiled. That's my girl. Changing the world one case at a time. After dinner, Claire went to her study, the room where she kept James's compass, his photos, his letters. She sat at her desk and pulled out her journal, writing down the day's events, her thoughts, her plans. And at the end of the entry, she wrote the words that had become her mantra, the truths she'd learned through fire. I forgave them, but I never forgot. And I never went back. Those words held everything, the pain, the growth, the victory, the peace. They were a reminder that forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation. That moving forward didn't mean pretending the past hadn't happened. That you could acknowledge someone's change while still protecting yourself. Claire closed the journal and looked at James's photo on her desk. He was smiling, frozen forever at 39, before the heart attack, before everything fell apart. I hope you're proud, she said softly. I hope you see what I built from the wreckage. I hope you know that your love gave me the strength to become this person. The compass sat next to the photo, pointing north. Always finding her way home. And Claire realized that home wasn't a place anymore. It wasn't the brownstone in Manhattan or this house in Brooklyn. It was who she'd become, strong, purposeful, unbreakable. The Drapers had tried to destroy her. Instead, they'd given her the fire she needed to forge herself into something magnificent. She smiled, turned off the light, and went to join Daniel and Justice in the living room, where a life full of simple joys and hard-won peace was waiting for her. The end. Before you go, I just want to say thank you so much for sticking with Claire's story all the way to the end. Her journey from devastation to triumph, from victim to victor, is a testament to the strength we all have inside us, even when we don't know it's there. If this story moved you, if it made you think about justice, resilience, or the power of fighting back against impossible odds, please leave a comment below. Tell me what part resonated with you most. Share your own stories if you feel comfortable. And of course, hit that subscribe button because we have so many more stories like this one. Stories about ordinary people who faced extraordinary challenges and came out stronger on the other side. Remember, you're more powerful than you think. And sometimes the biggest victories come after the darkest defeats. Until next time, stay strong, stay fighting, and never let anyone convince you that you're powerless. I forgave them, but I never forgot. And I never went back.